Well, welcome and good morning to Elevenses. Let me get my picture back up. Here we go. We should have my picture on screen any moment. No, it's there we are. There I am. Right. Okay. Good morning and welcome to the latest Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's astonishing, isn't it, that every time you get used to using a system, something changes. And just as I kind of log in to get my show underway this morning, I discovered that some of the button names have changed on the show today on the presentation software. So without further ado, let's try and tell you what I have on today's show. We have a fairly packed show, actually. I'm still trying to get the file up. We'll be looking at, first of all, the cancellation of Norton's Atlas motorcycles, which were supposed to be the affordable bikes within the Norton range. We have a new roads minister. Devon and Cornwall are trialling a new multi-offence camera van. Hackney bike parking protest is rescheduled to Saturday coming this weekend. MAG and the National Motorcycle Council have laid out their opposition to the government's PTW zero emissions plan. The 750cc Hornet has appeared. It's now up on the Honda website, and it comes in at a remarkable price of £6,999, which actually undercuts the MT-07. The first e-bike with solar panels is not quite what I expected, and we'll have a quick look at a power paste as well, which could solve hydrogen storage issues. And finally, today's discussion point, I mentioned that cyclists were getting hot under the collar, with most cyclists stealing their King of the Mountains points on Strava, but it goes a little bit more serious than that. We'll have a look today at whether it is actually a social app or an antisocial addiction, and how Strava encourages street racing. So quite a packed show today. Stay with me for the next 40 odd minutes whilst I take you through all my various activities. Now, first thing I did want to do is a little bit of housekeeping here. The live online web series event, which I had scheduled for tonight, I'm actually postponing it for a week because, to be perfectly honest, after having had COVID for 10 days or so, I'm still really not feeling anything like 100% at the moment. I'm just running out of energy mid-afternoon, evening. So I will be putting it back a week, and hopefully in a week's time I'll be a little bit more wide awake at 8 o'clock. Last night at 8 o'clock I was actually fast asleep on the sofa. So that will be the science of being seen in depth, which is all about understanding visibility, conspicuity, and camouflage. If you do have a ticket, of course, it will be valid for Wednesday the 12th. If you can't make the 12th and you were hoping to get there tonight to see it, it will be available on catch up for at least 72 hours. And at the moment, November's live event is going ahead as scheduled on Wednesday the 2nd. That's armchair riding. That's all about how we can use sports psychology techniques within motorcycling to learn from the comfort of our own armchair. So that's what we have coming up. As I say, postponing tonight's live online event for a week, just to give me a little bit more time to get over the dose of COVID, which I unfortunately caught 10 days ago. All right, okay, so Kevin's looked in. Good morning, Kevin. Nice to see you here. So on with the first news item then. Now, despite being shown to Motorcycle News as a pre-production model back in October 2019, back in the Stuart Gardner era, the Zhongshen 650 engine pair of Norton Atlas machines, the Ranger and the Nomad, have both been cancelled, at least for the foreseeable future. Oh dear, the image doesn't appear to be valid. Right, no, that's ready to go. There it is. Let me get that one back up again. So there's the bikes in question. Now, Norton CEO Dr. Robert Henschel, he said in a statement, "Over the last 2 years, our passion and focus has been to develop a new range of Norton motorcycles that will deliver the brand into the modern era. As such, we have now confirmed there are no plans to produce the Atlas range in the near future." Now, it does seem that a number of people had previously put down deposits on those particular bikes, and if you have done so, then you are being advised to contact the liquidators who are working on behalf of Norton's previous owners. Now, you'll recall that Norton was bought out by the Indian firm TVS Motors, who have re-engineered the V4 SV superbike, and that is now back on the market. But the backstory to the Atlas 650 twin-cylinder engine is actually fairly interesting, so I'll just run very quickly through the history. Now, the motor was essentially two cylinders lopped off the 1200 V4, and the engine was actually developed by Norton and engineering specialist Ricardo, and it was intended for use in several different bikes. Now, it was planned to use the 650 twin in an 84 horsepower format in this pair of bikes that you can see ahead of you here, the Atlases, which were billed as the foldable motorcycles in the range. But the engine was intended to go a lot further. It was, first of all, intended to go into a high power 105 horsepower variant as the super light sports bike. The power figure did seem a bit unlikely to me from a 650 twin, but hey ho. They did run 3 bikes at the lightweight TT in 2019, and one of them, in the hands of Peter Hickman, actually did manage to finish 8th. And finally, there would have been a supercharged carbon framed Superlight SS, which is a fairly unlikely 170 horsepower figure, and that would have been their range topper. But a deal was done back in 2017 to allow the motor to be produced in China under a design and license deal with Zhongshan, and that would basically given the Chinese manufacturer the right to locally produce the engines and put them into their own motorcycles. Now, as Norton ran into deeper and deeper financial trouble, the entire engine was actually sold off to Zhongshan, and the fruits of that deal appeared last year when the motor in 70 horsepower format, so slightly detuned, appeared in the Cyclone RX6 back in May. Now, TVS got Norton back up and running, and the plan seems to have been that Zhongshan would build the motors and supply them forward to Norton, who would build them into the finished bikes. Now, certainly the firm was registering customer interest in the Atlas models with the intent of getting those bikes back on sale, but as we've just seen, the deal is apparently off. The bikes is not going to go into production. Now, why that might be is open to speculation. I've had a think about that, and I have wondered if it is one of the following. Personally, I suspect it may be that the requirement to develop an all-electric motorcycle has suddenly become a much bigger priority. But another possibility is that the premium Norton brand doesn't want to be associated with a sort of budget made in China engine, even if it is their own design. Possibly Zhongshan want too much for the motor, and just possibly TVS actually intend to bring in a motor designed by Norton, again a new version of the motor, perhaps even built in India, which would bring their supply chain back in-house. But whatever it is, the Norton is off the cards. Right, Nigel's looked in and says, sorry to hear about the COVID. Yeah, I was quite sorry to get it, but hey ho, we live in a modern world and we have to get on and over these things. As soon as I can focus for more than about 3 hours a day, I will get back to something like normal. Something else that's trying to get back to normal, of course, is the government, and the new administration is picking up the reins, and so there have been some changes. And Catherine Fletcher, who's the MP for South Ribble, she has replaced Baroness Vere of Norbiton as the new roads minister, and she's expected to be responsible for roads, motoring agencies, including the DVSA and the DVLA, buses and taxis, the light rail system, which includes trams, underground and metro systems. So that's a change at the top of government. Another government organisation, or rather a local council, I should say, the Vision Zero Southwest Road Safety Partnership, which runs in Devon and Cornwall, they are funding the use of a groundbreaking camera system, which is said to be able to identify a range of behind-the-wheel offences. Now, these have basically, the camera does the usual thing of photographing a vehicle as it goes past, and it uses AI to detect offences, including mobile phone use and seatbelt failure to buckle up. Once the offence is detected by the AI, it's then reviewed by a human and a decision is made as to whether it's an offence. It's an Australian system, and you'll recognise one of these if you spot them down in the southwest, because the transit van style vehicle has got multiple cameras perched on tall posts. So that is being trialled down in Devon and Cornwall. So be cautious if you are down there. It also detects speeding, incidentally. Right, so don't forget, you are tuned to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. If you have any comments or questions that you want to ask, do drop me a line. I'm more than happy to answer them. Always interested in what you think about the stories on the show. If I can't get to you live, I will get to you at the end of the show. Now, here in London, Hackney Council, who, as you probably know, have been in the news recently over their attitudes towards parking motorcycles. Now, they have said that the introduction of 3 new, what they call parklets, is reaffirming their ongoing commitment to reclaim road space for motor vehicles and to build a greener borough in the aftermath of the pandemic. Now, what are parklets, you may be wondering? Well, basically, they are open spaces that, in the new style of things, they comprise a wooden platform and some planters, and the idea is that they offer local businesses some outside seating during the day, and they have been created by, quote, radically repurposing car parking spaces. And there will also be 2 cycle parking parklets with shrubs and trees to provide more greenery on the street. Now, it's an extension of a trial scheme which was set up a couple of years ago, which basically allowed local residents to create their own sort of parklets, and you can see an example here. And they've featured benches where people could sit down and just sort of take a break from walking up and down the street, and potted plants to provide more greenery. So this is this award-winning scheme has been extended, and Philip Glanville, who's the mayor of Hackney, he said 7 in 10 Hackney households do not own a car, which is why we're passionate about reclaiming space from motor vehicles for everyone. Not only do these parklets give people somewhere to sit and relax, they also provide more space for local businesses to trade. And he says it's all part of plans to rebuild a greener Hackney and encourage people to walk, cycle and shop locally. Although, of course, one sceptical response immediately asked what the council will be doing to deter cyclists and e-step scooters from using pavements. Now, in principle, I don't really disagree with the creation of a pavement culture, although I do question just how much use outdoor dining areas, for example, are going to get during a typical British winter. But the problem is that while 7 out of 10 residents may not have a car, 3 out of 10 clearly do. And many of the people who run local businesses will not live locally, but they will actually commute in to work in shops, factories, cafes, whatever. And not all of them can easily use public transport. So I'd be interested to know just how much the council have taken into account the need for people to get into the borough to work, but also to shop in the borough too. It's no good just sort of shutting down access completely. And that leads me into the Save London motorcycling protest, which is against Hackney's plans to charge motorcycles the same as cars for parking in the borough. That's whether you park in a residence bay or whether you park in a parking bay. And the other thing that they want to do is cut motorcycle parking from unlimited to just 4 hours per bay. And thereby, of course, that would make it almost impossible for riders to commute to work and then park, because they basically have to find somewhere else, park their motorcycle halfway through the day. So I think it's a bonkers scheme, particularly if you want to get people out of cars. I know that Hackney just want to get people out of motor vehicles altogether, but I think that it's a very short-sighted scheme. So the protest is scheduled for Saturday the 8th of October. You may be asking, didn't it happen earlier last month? Well, it would have done. Unfortunately, the first scheduled date clashed with, I think it was Hackney Carnival. The second scheduled date was disrupted. It was postponed following the death of the Queen. So the ride out now starts at midday on Downs Park Road. That's E58 MOJY. It's basically the Mossbourne Community Academy, and the ride out is a chance for you to show your objections to the Hackney schemes. And in the intervening period, the organisers have got a number of speakers who will come along and address the crowd before the ride out. So if you are in the area and you can get along to something like that, do it, and basically show some support for people who actually want to park. Kevin says, a road is not a park, build more parks. Well, easier said than done, of course, in London. There is very little open space. Well, that's not actually strictly true. London is actually one of the greenest cities in the world, I believe. But yes, you know, in theory, yes, if you had disused land, yes, you could do some park development, but it's not quite as simple as that. Right, so what else? National Motorcycle Council and the Motorcycle Action Group, they've both set out what they call strong opposition to government plans to end the sale of all new fossil fuel motorbikes and motorcycles by 2035 as part of the ongoing transition to zero emission vehicles. Now, the government plans also include a 2030 cut-off date for certain classes of PTWs. Responding to the public consultation, which closed on the 21st of September, MAG says that whilst not opposing decarbonisation, the government's policy choices are blinkered, economically poor, and are being carried out at a pace that lacks sufficient balance between justification and cost. The organisation says it's keen to work with government to achieve decarbonisation in a measured, evidence-based and economically responsible manner. The National Motorcycle Council calls upon the government to rethink its strategy and says it cannot support arbitrary UK-only targets and should instead move towards net zero goals on a basis of internationally agreed targets and strategies. So, as you can see, there is a opposition within the motorcycling organisations, both from the manufacturers and the users, to the government's plans. Personally, I think that we ought to be looking at hybrids rather more seriously than we are. Of course, it all depends on what the manufacturers are prepared to put out towards us, and for that we have to go and look at motorcycle ranges and see what manufacturers are actually building. And one new model, which I've been talking about for some months, has now broken cover on the Honda website, and that's the CB750 Hornet. The base model is just £6,999. Of course, you can throw hundreds of extra pounds at it by fitting the various packs that manufacturers love to sell now with their motorcycles, but it does undercut the formerly class-leading MT-07 by some margin. It's around £200 cheaper than the Yamaha. The Hornet is also up around 20 horsepower in terms of power output, and it pushes out 67.6 kilowatts, which is a fraction over 90 horsepower. That's at 9,500 RPM. Max torque, 74.4 Newton meters. That comes in at 7,000 RPM, and with a curb weight of just 190 kilograms, which is a tad under 420 pounds, according to my calculations, that should make it a very responsive motorcycle to ride on real roads. So if you want to find out rather more about the Honda, here is the link. You can go and have a look at that online at the end of the show. You can view the various colorways. There's a black, a white, a grey and a yellow bike, so you can play with the configurator, of course, and see how much extra cash Honda would like you to throw at them. I have to admit, I don't like the red framed versions very much, but so really, as I don't like the yellow one either, that kind of would restrict me to the grey machine. And I happen to note, incidentally, that the bike actually gets self-cancelling indicators. Now, that's only 35 years after I had them on my FZ750, and I frankly have missed them ever since. Now, one bike which is of interest, frankly, is the 750 Transalp. Now, as I've mentioned, this Honda engine is likely to appear in a range of bikes, and that machine there is the usual spy shot, of course, and it's taken to be the 750 Twin Transalp. Does say Transalp on the tank if you zoom in, and it's being speculated that this machine will break cover this autumn in the next couple of weeks at the autumn shows. Now, if the seat height can be kept sensible. The Africa Twin is a nice looking bike, but I think the seat is a bit atmospheric, and it's also rather expensive. If the price of this machine can be kept down to the same level as the Hornet, you could be looking at my next bike there. Right, okay, don't forget, if you want to catch this show, it goes out at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays. It goes out live nearly always, very occasionally as a recorded show, and even more rarely I will miss one if I've got other things going on. If you've missed a live show, you can always catch up. Or the easiest way to do it is over on my YouTube channel, where you can follow the shows as they appear. You can get them, of course, on Facebook on Catch Up, but it's a little bit more complicated once they slip out of the timeline. So, YouTube channel is youtube.com/survival schools UK. Don't forget that all important UK on the end, or you won't find me. Now, a headline popped up on my news feed last night that I just had to follow up. It was for a bike called the Spy. So this is it. And it was billed as the world's first electric motorcycle with built-in solar panels. Now, the review I read suggested that the Spy motorcycle looks straight out of a futuristic sci-fi movie. Well, it looks more like a monkey bike to me, but hey-ho. But it has a 125-mile range claimed on a single charge, a 40-mile-per-hour top speed, and a 6-hour charging time. And the interesting bit was the electric motorcycle has built-in solar panels that connect directly to the battery, allowing the owner to charge the battery by letting it sit outside in the sun. While there are other electric motorcycles on the market, none of them have implemented the built-in solar panels for charging. Okay, so monkey bike size, nothing too unusual. Performance around about that of a 70cc engine. So I looked at the pictures to see what the solar panels would be, and well, it turns out to be that is one of the two solar panels on this side of the bike. And there are two matching ones on the other side. You can see there's one here, but there's another one laid on the flat bit there. So I have a couple of 10-watt solar panels for the camper, and the idea is that what they do is they just about keep pace with the alarm, which would otherwise drain the battery during the summer. But each one is around 3 times the size of that panel. Now, the Spy appears to have 4 in total, 2 here and 2 on the other side, and I'd be surprised if they managed to put out the same 20 watts that my panels do. Now, even if the bike is for the average person who doesn't, quote, want to go 190 on the motorcycle or ride to Alaska and back, I'm left wondering just how many weeks you would need to leave it on charge in the sunshine to get that 125-mile battery topped up after a day of zipping around town, even if the town is sunny San Diego. So I must admit, I was wondering who was behind this project. I always kind of get a little bit suspicious when I see things like this. And it turns out that Dylan Welch is the CEO of Spy Motorcycles. He appears to be a green podcaster and a green media strategist. And apparently, according to the website, you can now order one of the first 100 motorcycles for $8,250. Right now, delivery is estimated to take 4 months. So clearly the bikes actually aren't built yet. So I wouldn't be holding my breath on this one, frankly. And I think if you're going to spend that kind of money, you're better off spending it on the Hornet. Okay, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, do consider supporting me over on my Ko-fi page. And if you want something to read, I haven't mentioned this for a while, as we're headed towards the autumn and the less pleasant part of riding, you can pop over to my lulu.com page /spotlight/survival skills, and you'll find my paperback books over there. Consider ordering some of those, and you'll get yourself some nice reading material for the winter. Now, I've got a couple more comments. Kevin says, I've seen proper pics of the new Hornet 750. Yeah, well, I've just given you the link there to the actual Honda page, which is now live. You can go and look at what Honda have got for you. Terry says you can just treat yourself to self-cancelling indicators with an aftermarket signal relay that's relatively easy plug and play. Yeah, I could appreciate that, Terry. And I appreciate it's not very difficult to fit, but I kind of think that this is actually something that the manufacturers themselves should have actually sorted out a long time ago. So, the fact that we've had self-cancelling indicators that have worked since end of the 70s, was it? Early 80s? They were on some Yamahas, weren't they? They weren't new when I had them on my FZ 750. So I do think it's a little bit, it's technology that we should have sorted out a long time ago. Right, okay, on to hydrogen now as a fuel. I've talked about hydrogen engines, ICEs burning hydrogen, but also there is, of course, the fuel cell, which takes hydrogen and combines it with oxygen and creates electricity. So you only get water coming out of the end of it. There are no combustion products at all. So it is zero tailpipe. And Toyota and Yamaha have been working on the conventional ICE engine, but obviously they're not zero emissions. So that's why there is the interest in developing hydrogen fuel cells. Now, the good news is that refueling a hydrogen burning car is much quicker than recharging an EV. And compared with existing battery technology, hydrogen is actually a more energy dense fuel too. But the problem is that there, at the moment at least, a lack of supporting refueling infrastructure, and there is problems with storing the gas. Now, once the hydrogen, of course, is created, you have to compress it into a high pressure gas or even a liquid for storage, transportation, and for actual use within the vehicle. The bad news is that compressing the gas actually requires significant amounts of energy itself, which obviously raises the price. And the high pressure tanks are expensive, they're heavy, they're bulky. So what if you could make the hydrogen actually on board as you drove? And that's the solution that's on offer from the Fraunhofer Institute's power paste. Now, this is a material made of magnesium hydride. It's combined with stabilizing compounds, and it's reported to be 10 times as energy dense as a lithium ion battery. Now, the paste is simply stored in a cartridge. The cartridge is equipped with a metal plunger. So if you think about the big sort of bottles of squeezy stuff that you use to line your sink and make it waterproof, that kind of thing, you get the idea. The plunger is pressed to squeeze the paste out, and it mixes with water, and the reaction of the paste creates the hydrogen. The other product is magnesium hydroxide, incidentally, which is a fairly alkali. It's a nasty alkali, but it's presumably contained somewhere. The gas is drawn off to the fuel cell, and that makes electricity. Now, right now, it is restricted to a tabletop demonstrator, but the Fraunhofer Institute did initially design this power paste system with e-scooters and electric motorcycles in mind. Now, when the cartridge is exhausted, you simply replace it and you top up the tank with water and presumably remove the waste product, the alkali too. And the Institute does claim that it can adapt this power paste system to cars. So there is another possible future technology, which isn't too far removed from the realms of possibility. Now, one more comment. Kevin says, not legal to pulse brake lights when indicating not braking. Yeah, okay. I mean, these things are often built for the American market initially, and they have different rules over there, of course. However, if you are slowing down, of course, which you probably would be if you're turning, then it is legal to show a brake light. I don't believe there's any connection, anything in the rules that says it actually has to be connected to a brake pedal or a brake lever. I would need to check that, but certainly there are devices on the market which put the brake light on. BMW actually have a system which is on their very latest bikes, which you might like to look at, Kevin. Right, anyway, on to today's discussion point, which was all about Strava, where I was asking if it's a social app or an antisocial addiction. Now, I mentioned in the last show that cyclists have been getting their polka dot jerseys in a bit of a twist, as they claim bikers are stealing KOM points on Strava. So what is a KOM point? You may not be familiar with the term, you probably aren't. The polka dot jersey, of course, is worn by the leader of the King of the Mountains competition in the famous Tour de France cycling event. Basically, those points are awarded to the first riders who get to the top of summits, which range from fairly small hills to the biggest mountains in Europe. And Strava is a well-known app which runners and cyclists use to record their own runs and cycle rides, and it bills itself as the world's largest social fitness app. But the system goes a little bit further. It creates a competitive streak by creating a virtual leaderboard with an award system to record the fastest rides. Now, humans are naturally competitive, and if you put two people in a room together with an exercise bike, I'm sure one of them will sooner or later suggest having a race on it. I can recall my brother doing that memorably years ago. Now, what are called the KOMs are actually awarded to cyclists who record the best time over a particular stretch of riding and therefore take a top position on a leaderboard. Male athletes take the KOM title, female athletes take the Queen of the Mountain. There's just one problem. Once you do own a KOM, then other riders try to do better. And just to show how serious the competition is being taken, there are lots and lots of online pages on how to start building your own collection of KOMs. Now, as one website investigating this phenomenon of battling for KOMs put it, quote, Strava started out so harmless. Then the wars began. Strava decided to award people a KOM for getting the quickest time on any given segment. And segments are quite literally everywhere. This led people to start riding their bikes in order to try to get the fastest time on a segment instead of riding their bikes because they actually wanted to do so. So what happens? Well, basically you set your fastest time and somebody else then will top it. And as soon as they do, you're alerted. And of course, what most cyclists do is immediately go out and try to take their title back. It can get a little addictive, explained the writer. Well, personally, that sounds like something of an understatement. And in fact, I found some research from the National University of Ireland in Galway, which concluded that whilst fitness apps can encourage healthy exercise routines, they can also be a spark for unhealthy attitudes and obsessive tendencies, and they can actually heighten stress when riders actually fail to achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve. So it does seem that some riders are actually addicted to setting these KOM segments, and others are out to best the original time in order to claim the titles. And it goes as far as some riders actually believing that their individual collections of titles are actually systematically targeted by other cyclists. And believe it or not, there are online discussions about whether stealing another rider's KOM collection is actually cyberbullying. Now, the latest phenomenon that's got the cyclists really hot under the collar is it appears that most cyclists have been using the app to record their rides along these segments too, and the cyclists are unhappy that there's no system to stop bikers, quote, nicking KOMs, as the Road.cc podcast recently termed it in their episode 35. And they felt the need to discuss an issue that is, quote, less about losing out on Strava leaderboards and everything to do with preventing danger on our roads. Now, to quote from the intro to their show, they said Strava KOMs are being hijacked by motorbikers going as fast as 112 miles per hour. It all started when Matt, who is one of the presenters, noticed some of his own KOMs were getting stolen by Strava users posting rides with absurd average speeds. And Matt discovered that when it came to flagging this to the world's largest social fitness platform, he discovered there was no way of reporting the activity for what it really was, putting other road users in danger. And the podcast went on to ask, should Strava be doing more to stop their platform from being used in this way? Could they even work with local authorities? Now, Strava's own guidelines do actually say that motorcycle activities are not allowed on Strava, and you cannot use the ride or e-bike activity types if you are on a powered bike. Now, according to Strava's own FAQs, the system does allow for suspect data to be flagged up for review. But what really struck me was the irony of the complaints about motorcyclists hijacking cyclists' fun seems to have been lost on the podcast authors who called on Strava to do more to prevent dangerous activities being uploaded to it. It would be credible if only Strava awarded KOMs for riders who are pedaling slowly and steadily up steep hills, which would be in the spirit, of course, of the original Tour de France KOM competition. But they don't. They award them for riding on the flat in areas with speed limits for cycles. Now, one rider who killed a pedestrian in Central Park in New York had recorded a top speed of 35.6 miles per hour in the park, which is more than 10 miles an hour over the cycling speed limit in Central Park, just a few hours earlier on that particular day. Even more alarmingly, they are awarded for completing the descents in fastest times. So if you know anything about racing bicycles down the hill, it's actually next to impossible for a motorcycle to stay with a well-ridden cycle on a steep descent. I did some cycle race marshalling some years ago, and trust me, they are quick. The trouble is that once you are traveling down the hill at high speed on a bicycle, it is actually very, very difficult to pull off a fast stop, as many professional cyclists have discovered. But they're racing on closed roads. And there have been a number of well-documented fatalities involving Strava users setting or attempting to set descending records, and with riders killing themselves hitting cars, but most frequently killing pedestrians. And it's not a new problem either. An action was actually filed with Strava way back in 2010 after a rider attempting to reclaim a KOM, which he'd lost earlier that day apparently, hit a car on a steep descent on the in the East Bay area of San Francisco. Now, there are warnings about riding responsibly, but it's hardly surprising that with Strava having created a system that rewards outcompeting other cyclists, the guidelines are being ignored by individuals in pursuit of fast times. Now, Suffolk University's Professor Michael Rustad, he noted, it's like Strava is creating a drag race. Strava is not just posting what third parties do, they're organizing it. And personally, I think the whole competition thing via an app is a big mistake. And I don't care what the app is, I would also include those motorcycling apps which allow you to record your speeds and your lean angles too, and put them in a public environment. So, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, as Juvenal said in his satires, who guards the guardians? Yeah, personally, I think that this is something that is a mistake and ought to be looked into. Right, okay. So that is pretty much it for the show. A couple more comments I was just reading. A little bit of discussion there about the brake lights modulating effect. Kevin says he's had cyclists pull out in front of me at junctions. Well, yeah, I mean, partly it's just maintaining momentum. Obviously, you burn a lot of energy if you've got to stop and start again. But yeah, everybody using the roads should be sensible and safe about it. My point is that if you actually encourage people to use the roads as a racetrack, which is exactly what Strava is doing, I think there is a serious question about the validity, the legitimacy of that app in the first place. And I believe questions should be asked on that one. Right, that's it for today. As I said, there are no live webcast tonight. I will be moving that. I haven't delayed it for a week just to allow me to hopefully get over the COVID a little bit more than I have done so far. So thanks for tuning into the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Any comments, any feedback? Obviously, I'm very happy to see what you have to say. I hope you found it interesting. There's been quite a lot of different content in today's show. And if you are out there on your bike today, it's gone cloudy again here in London. It's not a particularly pleasant looking day. It's very windy out there. Be cautious and make sure that you stay shiny side up.